New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and challenger Cynthia Nixon met for their only primary debate before the election on Wednesday. Cuomo is seeking his third term as governor. He has overseen the legalization of same-sex marriage and the implementation of one of the strictest gun control measures in the country during his time in office. Nixon, an actress and activist, argues Cuomo is not progressive enough on certain issues. Here are some of the highlights from their debate.
I'm not an Albany insider like Governor Cuomo, but I think that experience doesn't mean that much if you're not actually good at governing.
The governor of New York is not a job about politics. It's not about advocacy. It's about doing. It's about management. This is real life. Governor of New York, you're running a $170 billion budget. To change the campaign finance laws, you need something called the New York State Legislature to pass it. You don't snap your fingers as governor and it happens.
Well,
I
it will never happen
every
if you
year.
Empower the IDC
please, can you stop
and give the Republicans control of the state Senate.
Can you please do that?
If you stop lying, I will stop interrupting. I think if you look at the way Governor Cuomo, as soon as he came into office, he enacted tax cuts on millionaires, on billionaires, on corporations, on banks, and he's cut cumulatively 57,000 human service jobs, and his tax cuts have cut $25 billion in revenue.
She released 5 years of corporate taxes, dumped them in 3 hours on a Friday with no notice. Only Donald Trump has done less transparency on his taxes than my opponent.
Joining me here on set is Brian Lehrer. He is host of The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC Public Radio in New York. And in Hempstead, New York, Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin is a reporter for Real Clear Politics and a CBSN political contributor. Caitlin, I'd like to start with you. You are there. This is the first and only debate between Governor Cuomo and Cynthia Nixon. You were in the spin room after the debate and spoke with representatives from both sides. Let's listen.
I mean, look, we were expecting a Tony Award-winning performance from a professional actress, and I think she fell quite flat tonight. I think right when the debate started, we talked about experience, and she really has no answer for that. There's no question she's a terrific actress, but this is a climate where Donald Trump is ravaging communities, and you need somebody who knows how to get things done, real results, real people, who's tough, who's tenacious, who's a fighter, who can look a bully in the eye. I don't think we saw any of those attributes from our opponent tonight.
What was interesting, he actually got a lot of his facts wrong tonight, so I think it was a little condescending. And what was interesting is he actually, you saw his temper flare a lot tonight. He did a little finger wagging. What we saw is that the governor laid out his corporate corrupt centrist record with Cynthia, and Cynthia got to lay out her positive progressive vision for New York. So we feel very good about tonight. Great to be on the debate stage one-on-one, really taking him on, and she was fabulous.
Caitlin, I wonder if there was any sense at all, since you were there, about whether or not there were unexpected moments between this matchup. Obviously, this is something that we weren't even sure was going to happen initially, but were there some moments that you detected that perhaps came as surprises?
Well, the strategy on Cynthia Nixon's part, remember, she is new at this. This is her first foray into politics, running for office, and her first debate. She was trying to get under Andrew Cuomo's skin here, try to get him off message, try to rattle him a little bit. And the campaign thinks that she was able to do that. You heard them go back and forth a lot, saw some eye rolls and some really tense exchanges. What both sides were trying to do was to discredit the other. For Governor Andrew Cuomo, he was trying to paint Cynthia Nixon as someone who is inexperienced. He said being a governor of New York is about being a manager, managing things like floods and fires, state budgets, and also things like terrorism. And he said that Cynthia Nixon lived in a world of fiction while he lives in a world of facts, of course alluding to the fact that Cynthia Nixon is a famous actress. Cynthia Nixon, for her part, was trying to paint Cuomo as kind of an establishment figure, part of a culture of corruption, as Democrats are kind of using that that message across the country, and saying that she is not an Albany insider. So you have this kind of insider-outsider dynamic. Being an insider, though, the governor thinks that as the incumbent, that is an advantage for him. And we only have a couple of weeks, of course, till voters decide.
Brian, I want to turn the same question to you. You have obviously been studying these two. Were there moments during this debate where you thought, well, that was something unexpected? I know for me, when the governor very vehemently denied that he was running for president in 2020, that seemed to be a moment to me.
Well, that certainly made news. I don't think he has said that before. His name has been mentioned any number of times as a potential Democratic hopeful. When the moderators tried to pin him down on it, he seemed to allow himself to be pinned down and rule out a run for president in 2020 if he's reelected. I think another surprising moment kind of along those lines came at the very end when the moderators with the lightning round question seemed to put Cynthia Nixon on the spot as to whether she would take a salary as governor given her personal wealth, and her face at least looked to me like she had never thought about that question before and that she felt penned in to a yes answer, and she said, yes, I would not take a salary.
I wonder if you think, and I hate to kind of put you on the spot here, but based on what you know of the New York electorate, is it apparent that there's a clear winner after this debate?
Well, I don't like to put myself in place of the voters.
Right.
There's a Democratic electorate for this Democratic primary coming up on September 13th, and I'm going to let them make their own decisions about that. I will say that as a matter of style, I agree with the analysis that we just heard. They were trying to play certain roles. I think Cuomo was trying to be the calm guy in charge, which voters could either hear as the calm guy in charge or they could hear it as imperious and paternalistic. Nixon was trying to get under the governor's skin, and people might hear that as too aggressive, or they might hear that as the populist voice of the people rising up to power.
Caitlin, let me turn back to you on the notion of the audience, because obviously we could not see them, but we could certainly hear them at various points. Tell us about what that was like and sort of the energy in the debate hall there.
Certainly an interactive audience, and the moderator had to kind of turn around and ask people to be quiet and respectful. I will say that, you know, the auditorium is right behind me here, and it was in a gymnasium, and it was in a really small section of the gymnasium. So this was a very intimate audience here, and both candidates were seated, as you saw there, and it was a very short debate. And, you know, the governor was really trying not to make any real news here, trying to get through this. And of course, Cynthia Nixon wanted to prove herself a worthy competitor on the stage, going toe-to-toe with the governor, face to face, for the first and only time that these two candidates will actually have a debate.
So, Brian, substantively, we heard discussion of the New York City subway system. And for people who maybe even just have visited New York, they may be able to bear witness to some of what we had heard about the infrastructure and criticisms of it. Well, Cynthia Nixon was quick to blame Governor Cuomo for some of the problems in the subway. And let's listen to some of what she said.
Governor Cuomo knows the MTA is controlled by the governor. It is a state agency, and to pretend anything else is completely disingenuous. The reason that the subway is in such bad shape, yes, we have had it preceded Andrew Cuomo, but he stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA budget for his pet projects that have nothing to do with it. He used the MTA like an ATM, and we see the result. He has had 7.5 years to avoid this very avoidable crisis in our New York City subway.
So help us understand this, Brian. Who actually funds the New York City subway system?
Well, it's funded by a combination of tax dollars and fares. And one of the questions that the moderators asked leading up to that answer was whether they would cancel a scheduled fare hike that is scheduled for next year because of the recent poor service. And where they disagreed was that Cuomo said, yes, he would cancel the scheduled fare hike if the city of New York kicks in half the difference to make it up, then the state would too. It's funded on a combination of city and state taxes. They've been at each other, the city and the state, over who's supposed to pay more. And Nixon said she would have the state cancel it, and as we heard there, accuse Cuomo, which I think I would have to fact check it, but I think it is factually correct that the MTA budget has been rated for the general operating budget of New York State, and I think she made a valid point there.
Because how critical an issue is that, the New York City subway system?
Well, she's made it a central organizing principle of her campaign. She had a hashtag that kind of caught on, Cuomo's MTA, which is designed to, of course, put responsibility for it right in his lap, and people want the state to do something. I think people hear the back and forth between the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, and Governor Cuomo over who really does run the MTA. The answer is that it is controlled by the state, and so this is one of the most salient things for voters in New York. Their commutes to work every day, they're getting around, being late, just unpleasant conditions, all these delays of recent times. So it is a very salient issue, and voters will decide whether they think she's got the goods to fix it, not just criticize.
Caitlin, I'm wondering more broadly here, how has Cynthia Nixon's candidacy actually changed the way in which Governor Cuomo has campaigned? Has her candidacy forced him to perhaps move more to the left than he otherwise may have done without having a challenge from her?
Right. Well, this campaign really comes against the backdrop of other campaigns in which we've seen more progressive challengers of either incumbents or candidates who were thought to be the front runners overcome those incumbents or front runners. We just saw that last night, of course, in Florida. Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum beating all expectations and becoming the Democratic nominee for governor in the state of Florida. We saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, in Queens, overcome a long-time entrenched Democratic incumbent. So there is a sense among some of these long-shot candidates, and we could argue certainly that Cynthia Nixon is a long-shot candidate. The polls still show her lagging overwhelmingly behind Andrew Cuomo, that this is giving the campaign energy. And I talked to the senior strategist who said as much, and they think that the recent election results give them some momentum coming in.
I want to turn back to the debate, Brian, because there was a story against the backdrop of this debate happening. There was a story that did not actually emerge during the course of this debate, and that story had to do with Governor Cuomo reportedly halting the Harvey Weinstein investigation because it was revealed that Weinstein's lawyers donated money to Cuomo's re-election campaign. Now, is it surprising to you that that was not brought up during the debate?
I just saw a version of that on my way over here, and I'm not totally clear on the facts. I thought Cuomo had halted an investigation into the Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance, for his handling of the Weinstein affair, not prosecuting him earlier, and that Cuomo halted the investigation into the DA. I think that's what happened, but I'm not entirely up on that story.
So perhaps I think part of the issue here is because it's unclear, that would not necessarily be a clear line of attack for Cynthia Nixon to go after the governor on, when it appears there's still a lot of things to be sorted out with that story.
I guess there must be, because one of her main lines of attack was that he takes corporate donations.
Right. That would have been an opportune time to bring that point up for her.
And even though he hasn't been charged with corruption in any criminal sense, she kept calling him corrupt because of his relationship with corporate donors and the favors that she says he has done for them over time. Of course, he tried to push back on that by saying she was a corporation. I thought that one was a little weird.
Yeah, what was your take on that?
Well, I mean, I guess she has incorporated as a small business, but he was trying to make her seem like a corporate donor to Mayor Bill de Blasio's campaign, and then asking him for some favor for
flying over the
helicopters make a lot of noise when they fly over, something in support of her former Sex and the City co-star Sarah Jessica Parker. Cuomo mentioned her name as the recipient of the favor, but I think trying to compare her as whatever little corporation she's incorporated as, and an oil company or a bank or something was a little strange, but that was his pushback on that.
Well, what about, though, her initial line of attack regarding corruption? I mean, is that an issue that's particularly resonant with New York City, with New York voters, or is this an issue that, they think about as being sort of part and parcel of the political landscape of New York politics?
I think corruption is rarely issue number one. It is things like the economy and the subways, but at the same time, people are pretty disgusted with the degree of corruption in both parties in New York State, and people very close to the governor, very high up, have now been convicted of corruption, even though he wasn't charged. She can ask, well, did you really not know, or did you just have bad judgment in who you hired? We can hold you responsible for that. How much of a voting issue it becomes remains to be seen.
All right. Well, Caitlin, now that the debate is over, what can we expect, you think, from both candidates ahead of the September 13th primary?
Well, the Nixon campaign said that the candidate will be out in full force. They said she'll be out in public a lot, participating in a lot of different events and such over the next couple of weeks. We know the governor has not been as public in terms of campaigning and talking to the media, but he does have that perch of being the incumbent, being the governor of the state, and he is able to show kind of himself doing the job as he's running for re-election. And we know that the airwaves are covered in ads. Actually, just today, the Cuomo campaign released an ad showing clips of Cynthia Nixon praising Governor Cuomo at a different time, trying to say that she at a time did support him. We're watching this race. Of course, New York State is critical. New York City, of course, critical as well. But looking at these governors' races, it's really interesting in a couple of different ways. First of all, it tells us a little bit about kind of where the Democratic Party is, where the energy is right now. Even though Governor Cuomo is the front runner, Cynthia Nixon has challenged him a bit, has put him on his toes a little bit, caused him to create a gaffe recently. And she's very much trying to harness some of the energy we've seen across the country. And really interestingly, the governor brought up Donald Trump over and over and over again. Now, usually governors' races can separate themselves from Washington, kind of say that they're running their own states right now. But the governor sees New York State, he says, as a way to defend against Donald Trump. He talked about immigration policies, energy policies. He talked about women. So he said that New York State should be a state that sticks up to Donald Trump. Even though he said that he's not going to run for president, still I thought that was an interesting dynamic, trying to play into those national themes in what is usually considered a local race.
Right. No, that's a very good point. It was very clear that he was wanting to raise Donald Trump's name throughout that. Same question to you, Brian. What do you think we'll be seeing here from the candidates ahead of the primary?
Well, I'm curious to see how this debate plays on social media. I think it's fair to say that Cuomo chose this time, accepted a debate only for this time because it's going into Labor Day weekend. It's meant to minimize having Cynthia Nixon look as sort of his equivalent, the two of them on the debate stage. Not that many people will be paying attention to the news, but that worked better in the old days, I think. Now it's going to be sliced and diced, and sound bites well at CBSN are going to go viral, and we'll see which ones do, and we'll see if the debate has resonance over a period of days.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch the social media over the next couple of days. All right, Brian Lehrer and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks to you both for your insight. Really appreciate it.